and to give you some more, going to give you some more maps. Going to give you some more maps. Remember, map is not the territory. A map is a map. Just like my map of the universe is different from yours. The most brilliant genius, Ibn Arabi map of the universe. I mean, we can certainly make great use of it, but it's still a map. That's why one of the core ways to translate the word Sufism or Sufi is like direct taste. So we don't eat our maps, we use our maps to find the food or the destination. That's what we eat. Now, all that said, this is a really good map. And surprisingly, it's a map that we've forgotten. Again, when we made this shift from this kind of like divine framework to this rational framework, we kind of like moved away and we forgot about this map. And I mean, maybe you know about it, but I certainly didn't. And like I said, I'm kind of a nerd, so I like to know about things. But it's kind of wild because this map of the universe was around for like 2,000 years. We've only not been using it for like 200 years. And yet we totally forgot it. And it's like we used to live with a map that was like super 3D or 10D. It had like a lot of dynamic range. It had like valleys and massive mountains and the cosmos and even beyond that. And nowadays, because we're so steeped in science, we've kind of like got this flattened, contracted map. And we're so embedded within those ways of thinking, we don't even realize it. Essentially, the map we've got left is the map of the physical and the senses. That's what we've got left with. Look, I love science. I'm a nerd. I went to math and science high school. I probably shouldn't have copied my chemistry lab notebook from my classmate and then lost both of our notebooks. But I'm going on a tangent here. Still feel some embarrassment about that. It was really terrible telling a classmate, oh, by the way, that lab notebook I borrowed from you to copy, yeah, I lost both of ours on the bus. Terrible, it's not funny. I probably didn't know how to apologize properly, deeply enough at the time. Anyway, I'm going on tangent. Science is great. However, we are in a culture of what we might call, I talked about secularity last time. Secularity, think of it as blended in with this scientific materialism, AKA the only thing that really exists is matter. We look out, we see matter. What's doing the looking out? The brain's made of matter. All consciousness is a bunch of chemical, biological interactions that produce my perception of more matter. It's a very matter-centric perspective. That word empiricism, you know that one? That's what they call like the science. Science is empirical. We are studying data. We're studying what we can observe and measure. It's really interesting to look at that word empiricism because it means basically what you can measure with the senses. Whether it's our senses or our senses observing via a massive telescope or a particle collider. It's like what we can measure. So we're sort of like constrained and we don't even realize it. I didn't. We're kind of like in this like five senses, matter. That's the size of our universe. Even if you extend to the edges of the universe, which you know, can seem quite amazing. It's just more matter. Spirit, that's for hippies and New Agers and, you know, whatever you want to call it. So we've had this 10-dimensional universe reduced to 3 dimensions. But no matter how much we reduce it, you can't keep the 10 dimensions down. That's why you go deeper into the science and all of a sudden they're like, oh, string theory, 10 dimensions. So no matter how much you try to quash the imagination or the sacred, it's going to pop right back up again like weeds growing out of concrete. Onto the map. I promised you a map. Drink some tea. It's quite an energetic tea, isn't it? So this map has 3 main levels of the universe, call it that, of being. I'll use that word being. Let's call these dimensions of being. Just been talking about that first part of it, the sense-based, the physical. So let's call that like, let's call it the physical universe. That's real. That's beautiful. That is the sacred expressing itself in physical form. But we got more than that. We got 2 more plus a bonus. 2 more plus a bonus. If you're good. So what's the next one? Now, we're going to do a nice, this is Beatles time. This is Sgt. Pepper time. So in this physicalist model, in this secular scientific model, the imagination is just what the brain imagines. It's more or less fantasy, at best inspiration or good ideas, creative thinking. But it's just all sort of like a function of the brain. Now let's do a fresh take on what the imagination is. Let's say just as there's a physical world, let's say there's a whole world, whole universe of the imagination. Physical universe, imaginal universe. I'm using IMAGINAL. Henry Corbin called this the imaginal world. This idea comes most directly from the Ismaili, the Persian, the Sufi tradition. That's where this map has been most deeply, most subtly, most complexly developed in a way that has been left to us in written language and continues as lived embodied practice and practice communities. The imaginal world. So when we dream, when we're asleep, or when we dream, when we're awake, when we have visions, ideas, insights. These are emerging from the imaginal dimension of being, the imaginal world. Little story, little anecdote. So Ibn Arabi, he's writing in the Futuhat. This was his 10,000 page book that he wrote based on a vision he received on meeting who he called the youth. And on the body of this youth, like, imagine cobblestones, like on a ancient pathway, like, or like a tattoo, like etched on the body of this youth were these lines. And for the next 10, 20, 30 years, Ibn Arabi wrote down the vision, the words, the revelations, the insights that were written on the body of that youth in that one encounter. Think of that, a 10,000 page book, probably the most encyclopedic record of a spiritual map of the universe, all from an imaginative vision. So this, you might think like, okay, yeah, well, you might not be, you might just be kind of a bit stunned to hear about that. And so what I want to say is that connection and relationship to the imaginal world, if it can give birth to one of the greatest texts of all time, think about what it can do for us. How can it guide us? How can it infuse our being, our purpose, our the life we make for ourselves, or the life that is divinely gifted to us? How can it be in alignment with our imaginative essence? You know, someone once asked Ibn Arabi, they said, yeah, that's all well and good that you have these deep insights, but you're Ibn Arabi, like, what about me? And what was Ibn Arabi's response to that? His powerful one. He said, the only difference between me and you is the degree to which I have faith in my heart. The degree to which my heart has been opened up to being a humble servant to reality. Sometimes we hear those things and you're like, yeah, but that's still just a nice thing that he said to make us feel better. But if we really take it as truth, and he was a truthful person, isn't he saying what I was saying earlier today, that this whole hierarchy and intelligence thing is just like off base? Ibn Arabi, who recognized that he was in this very special position as a human, the way he just functioned and shared and visioned, like he knew like there was something special going on, but he still said, there's no difference between you and me. other than the openness of my heart. So I'm going to draw up bring up another picture here. I want to bring in a visual to maybe make this map, give it another viewpoint. Let's get back into share screen. All right. So this is our map. You might need a little orientation from me to this map. It's a good one. And I think for some of us, it might be helpful because in the classical times, remember I was saying that 2,000-year period, it would have been like a triangle and it would look really hierarchical, like that stuff. I'm cool with that. But I've got one of my mentors is just really offers a lot of like sage wisdom and caution around, even the ways we represent insight through hierarchy. So this is a very much more organic map. Let's start. Let's start with what we're most familiar with, the physical world. So, if we start on the right-hand side of this image, we see this beautiful leaf, this plant that is growing out of this sea. So that's the world we're most familiar with in the modern world. We're like, ooh, here's a nice piece of physical leaf. Let's measure it and tell you what genre of biology it's from, and I can tell you all the chemicals that are happening inside it, and I can tell you about photosynthesis, but that's what it is. It is what we see, okay? So that's the physical world. Let's get a little deeper. Now, what is coming out of the bottom of that bean? You've got the roots. The roots. That is the metaphor for the imaginal world, okay? Now that's very interesting because all of a sudden we see, oh, wait a minute, there's a deep connection between the physical and the imaginal. In fact, one could even say that the physical is fed by the imaginal, it's nourished by it. It's developing from it, you could say. So this is really radical. We currently tend, in the scientific perspective, just tend to think of this physical world as the world. But the idea that this physical world could be based in a whole other universe or dimension of being, like these roots, that opens up a whole new domain of science if we wanted to be so bold. Story I was going to tell about Ibn Arabi. So in the chapter 8 of the Futuhat, the vast earth, in which he talks about the imaginal world, he tells a very brief story. So imagine that you take a golden ring and you throw it into a desert. So Ibn Arabi is like, that golden ring, that represents the physical world, the size of it. If you took the physical world up until the skies, as far as it goes, that all fits into this golden ring. You throw that golden ring into the desert. He says the desert is the imaginal. And the size of that physical ring is just a tiny little thing compared to the massive size of the imaginal. So this is really a psychedelic insight. It's a mind expanding insight. It's an imagination expanding. It's a heart expanding. It's a science expanding. It's a sociology expanding. It's a religion expanding. It's an education expanding insight. We've forgotten our roots. We've forgotten our roots. Now, I said there were 3 levels. Let's get into the third one. What is the third level? In this image, it's represented by the seed itself. The seed contains the roots. It contains the genesis of the roots. It contains the genesis of the growing plant, the leaves. The seed is the seed of the physical and the imaginal. How do we want to give this seed a term in this map? Physical world, imaginal world. This one's a little tricky because we're not used to using these classical terms anymore, but I'll throw out a few terms. That world would be called the world of light. It would be called the intellectual world. In Plato's model, it would be like the world of Platonic forms. In a Judeo-Christian, Muslim, Abrahamic tradition, it'd be the angelic world, like a heavenly world. We're not so down with this concept of angels because we're hyper rational, and so we're not really like thinking about that in a deeper, more complex way than our kind of God is dead model. But let's just call it, could also call it the world of awareness. I think in Buddhism, when they're talking about like true nature, kind of gets in that territory. So it's like, also it's simple to think of it as a world of light because, or even like a world of clear light. I think in Tibetan Buddhism, they orient around that concept of clear light. So you could think of clear light as another way. These are just different labels, adjectives to describe this world, which is beyond our description, to be honest. It's not a world that really humans from this classical model are spoken of as having direct access to, because it's just like, kind of like, just like the way we can't look at the sun physically. It's like our human bodies and minds just aren't designed to like be in direct relationship through our kind of perception of that world, because it's just kind of like, I guess if the imaginal is like the desert and the physical world's the ring, it's even more of a whole other thing. So that's in the maps that we receive from those olden days. That's kind of the way they understand it, is it's just sort of like a light that is too intense for us to encounter. And so you've got these 3 worlds: the physical, the imaginal, the light, or the awareness, or the plug in what you like. So this is where we've expanded from 3D to 10D. I have this pet theory that you could kind of map on string theory to this, like the physical world is like dimensions 1 to 3. The imaginal world would be like dimensions 4 to 6. And that world of like clear light would be 7 through 9. I don't know where you throw in time, call it the 10th or call it the 0 times in there somewhere to make it up to 10. So there you've got your nice 10-dimensional model. And when we think of like the models of string theory, you've got a couple of ways to think about 10-dimensional models. One of them is like brain theory, BRANE, where it's like the 3-dimensional is sitting on like another like 6-dimensional bubble. So we're kind of like a bubble on a bigger bubble, or you kind of flip it around and the other 6 dimensions are actually folded into this 3 dimensions. So they're sort of like super micro dimensions, but really powerful dimensions. We just don't like see them because they're so enfolded in everything that we are. So that might be another way to think about it. So that's where you match it up to string theory. And I don't know, you obviously can't like prove this stuff, but it has some really nice synchronicities. So we're doing a little bit connecting of maps here. String theory, imaginal, classical models. I did mention there was a bonus level, so let's knock that one out. So if you basically look at this image of the bean, that seed world, the physical world and the imaginal world, the root world. If you just imagine like all of that emerging out of divine like emptiness, in Ibn Arabi's words, he says, no one will ever know anything about God. So it's like we can know something about the seed, we can know something about the leaves, we can know something about the roots, but he's like, what all of that emerges from, the mystery to which we give so many names, he's like, no one's ever going to understand that. And at the same time, he says, God is closer to you than your jugular vein. So at the same time, it's completely incomprehensible, completely mysterious, and also closer to us even than our jugular vein, even than what we physically think of as is closest to us. So it's this paradox of language that the deepest, most incomprehensible mystery that gives rise to everything is also the essence of our very being. Again, coming back to the decentralized spirituality. They don't tend to tell you that in the Catholic Church. You know what I mean? You get a little bit more of that in the Greek Orthodox Church. They left a lot more room for what they called like the divine energies as being something you can have direct access to, and that divine energy was a legit way to understand divine, the incomprehensible divine being. They've got a word for that, apophatic. Apophatic is like negative theology. It means you can't understand God. That's the technical term for it. apophatic, apophatic. Okay, so we've done some maps. We brought in the bonus round, and what else do I want to say here? Let's bring it back to our direct experience. So we kind of gone like a bit psychedelic. We've gone intellectual in the truest sense. That old school sense of the intellect was that third level, third dimension of being, the heavenly, the angelic, the clear light. Bringing it back to us, to our direct experience. So let's just take a little shaky, feeling our bodies, because even as we're having this psychedelic conversation, we want to feel ourselves, to know that this conversation isn't separate from this body and this being that we are. We're just riffing off of who we are, exploring, riffing, jazzing, painting, imagining. All of existence is imagination within imagination. I think 2 more things for today. Korban, the ally. I want to plant a seed for the ally, and then I want to get into something Korban said first. So we just laid out this map of the cosmos, so to speak. In fact, not just the physical cosmos, the metaphysical cosmos, the divine cosmos. Let's stop this image. So how does it connect to you and me, this map? Sounds kind of cool. But how do I know that? How do I feel it? And Henry Corbin says in the beginning of one of his books, he says the way we know that those cosmic multi-level dimensions of being is because that's how we are built ourselves. It's already us. Who we are, we're wired to be in relationship to all of those dimensions. We don't have to do some big move to leave the physical world, get into the imaginal world, get some transmission from the light world. He's like, we're already doing it. We're already doing it. We're overlooking that because the way that contemporary psychology is telling us to think about who we are, the language and the concepts that it's giving us, deny and dismember those dimensions of our being. So this isn't making something up. This is like a remembrance. This is like a remembrance of what and who we already are. Much, much more magnificent than a biology textbook would lead you to imagine. So what Corbin is saying basically is like, this map of these different dimensions of being, we've got these organs of perception that correlate to each of these dimensions. We're built to be in relationship to them. Physical world, boom, we've got our 5 senses. And I don't know, probably, I imagine someone could come up with a map where it's like, oh no, you don't have 5 senses, you got 7 physical senses or whatever. So We've got our physical senses, we've got our bodies. That's how we orient to the physical world. How do we orient to the imaginal world? Naturally. How is it built into us? Corbin says, we have not just organs of sense perception, we have an organ to perceive the imaginal. Does anybody want to guess what is that organ that perceives the imaginal? It's an easy one. It makes sense, but it's an easy one. It's the heart. He says the heart is the organ that perceives the imaginal. And when he says the heart, I don't think he's talking about like the physical biological heart. That, who knows? There's probably some connections there. But he's talking about the heart in its spiritual sense, in its symbolic sense. The heart, just put your hand like right here, if you like, so over the center of your chest. This heart of your being, as like an energetic center, has a functionality to perceive the imaginal world, to dream, to imagine, to create, to connect with this magnificent universe symbolized by that massive desert of the imaginal. The heart is an organ of the imagination. It's a portal, it's a doorway. What about that third universe, the clear light universe, the word of pure knowing? We talked about knowing the other day. The world of pure knowing. Got to say one more thing about the heart. We access the imaginal, Corbin says, by using the active imagination. The active imagination. Okay. Wanted to mention that because as we get into this third universe, the universe of knowing, how do we connect with it? We connect through the active intellect. The active intellect. So again, we need to revise, reframe, reperceive what we mean by intellect. Again, through the last few hundred years, the intellect has been downgraded. It's been downgraded into rationality, the rational thinking mind. No, the intellect, or I should say the languaging of the intellect has been downgraded. The intellect hasn't been downgraded at all. It's intact, but let's recover it in its fullness. So the intellect is this faculty in us which receives perceptions, insights, revelations from that world of pure knowing. I did say that we're kind of veiled from it because it has a kind of like, there's so much energy in it, let's say, but we receive like revelations, not just some religious person or a philosopher, but Ibn Arabi gives an example. He's like, if you're a lawyer, and he used that word, he's like, if you're a lawyer and you have some insight into how to deal with the case you're working on, he's like, that is a revelation, an insight that descends from that world of clear light, of knowing, pure knowing. It's like, we can't just like open it all up wide, but we can, those meanings can descend to us. And it is often the medium of the imaginal universe that kind of filters that stuff through to us. So it's like, here's this pure knowing, I get an insight about it, maybe an idea that takes form in the imaginal, like, oh, I could do it this way. And then it comes into integrating with how I act it out in this physical world. So all of these levels are very deeply integrated. Any map of them is going to be simplified. it's probably, you'd have to get into like quantum dynamics to really start to get the complexity of how this is all working, or even a sense of that. And then this is all fueled by the underpinning of this like divine being, you know, incomprehensible divine being in the form of divine energies, taking form as this clear light dimension, this imaginal dimension, this physical dimension. Important takeaway here again, we have built into us the organs to be part and parcel of this 10-dimensional universe. We're not 3D, we're 10D. Or if, you know, 10 years from now, string theory is like, we're 30D. If we're not 10D, we're 30D. However you want to put it. The number of Ds doesn't exactly matter. But what matters is that we can feel our way into, with our imagination, the way we are so much bigger than we have been educated to believe, or at least the way most of us have been educated to believe, or at least the way I was educated to believe. Okay, I think this is a pretty comprehensive download around the imagination and the imaginal. So we're going to wrap it up here for today. If I were to make some connection to decentralization in technology, I would just say, I mean, all you got to do is listen to some podcasts or read some stuff about crypto and blockchain. It's scary how creative and imagination based it all is. Like, to be honest, I get overwhelmed when I look at it. I'm like, is this like, it's intimidating how much creativity and new ideas and new ways of doing things are happening. So when we decentralize, we unleash the imagination. When we, in technology, when we decentralize spirituality, we unleash the imagination within each person, because we're not saying, no, we've got to stuff down the imagination so we can hold all the power in these institutions. No, we're unleashing the imagination of the people by empowering them to recognize their own divine nature, their own multidimensional divine being. Last thought. Next talk, we're going to get into, we're going to move from maps to the practical. What we're going to talk about a practice that's been important to me for accessing, for integrating a relationship to the imaginal world, to pure knowing, to an understanding of this physical world as being interwoven with these other dimensions of being. We're going to get into a practice that I learned a couple years ago. We may not practice it, but we'll learn about it, talk about it, as to how we can get into deeper relationship with our divine being. And perhaps we'll posit how this practice, if it, and practices like it, if they were to occur at a more widespread level, how that might support a movement of decentralized spirituality and an unleashing of imagination, love, and well-being. So thank you for going on this journey with me today. This was a lot longer. I was feeling, perhaps part of why I was feeling intimidated by was the scope of this subject matter, and perhaps knowing that it might take a lot of time to talk about it. So I hope you found it useful, supportive. If you're interested in journeying with me, you can check out the allykind.com website. You can subscribe there for updates. Currently it's free. Who knows, maybe one day I'll charge $1 million for subscription, but probably not. But who knows, maybe I'll do a Patreon thing down the line, type thing. But I do really value the idea of like keeping these things as free and accessible as possible. It feels aligned with what my values are. Thank you. And as they say in the Sgt. Pepper's song that leads off that album, it's wonderful to be here. It's certainly a thrill. You're such a lovely audience. We'd like to take you home with us. We'd love to take you home. Hope you have a peaceful and safe day. Bye-bye.